Um, Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next episode of Tax Stories podcast. My guest today is Dr. Leopoldo Parada. Did I pronounce it right, Leopoldo?
That's correct. Perfect.
Uh, great. Welcome to the show. And I will briefly give your background. It's not easy because it's very long, but please bear with me. That Leopoldo is associate professor in tax law at the University of Leeds in the UK. Studied tax in the universities in Chile, Florida, Valencia, got his PhD in Valencia, has been working in universities in Italy, Germany, Australia, the US, and Chile, of course, and has been working also at IBFD and some tax advisory companies in Chile and Brazil. Is a tax policy advisor for different governments and international organizations around the world. I even found a nice award by Tax Corp 35 Leaders of the Future in Taxation in Canada, awarded you as one of the most promising tax policy experts worldwide. I saw that mainly your research is focused on BEPS, tax treaties, and digitalization. You speak 5 languages, and of course, you are author of countless publications and several books. And I saw the brand new one, second edition of Double Non-Taxation and the Use of Hybrid Entities. So please have a look at the Walters Kluwer bookstore for having the book. Leopoldo, did I miss anything?
No, that's fantastic. Yes, that's a
All
great
right.
that's a great introduction.
Thank you. Welcome to the show. So let's start that you are originally from Chile, right?
That's correct. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
I was.
Uh,
no,
Go on, please.
no. That's correct. I was
Yeah.
born in Chile, and I left Chile when I was 25 years old. So it's been
Mm.
already. So I'm close. I'm becoming 40 this year. So it's already quite a while. Yeah.
Right. Well, for those who have never been in Chile, what is Chile like?
Well, Chile is a very complicated question because such a long country that there are places that I honestly don't know. And so when,
Mhm.
when friends here in Europe and in the UK, they ask me, how Chile is, it's very different from one corner to the other. It's a beautiful country in terms of landscape, in terms of food. You have this very precious thing, which is that if you are in a city, for example, like Santiago, you are in a few hours, in 1 hour, 1 hour and a half, you are in the coast, and then less than 1 hour you can be in the mountains, and that's a very privileged position. Actually, I recently visited Chile. I just came back from a couple of weeks there, and it was a visit after 8 years from my previous visit, and it changed a lot.
Mm.
The city, the landscapes, but the essence is still the same. It's a very Latin American country. People are very, very warm and very open. So that's super nice every time I go there.
Great. Historically, is there a story how has Chile got almost all the western coast of the South America?
Well, actually, here I'm gonna make probably a lot of mistakes in terms of history, but hopefully nobody is in Chile specialized in history is listening to this. But before the Spanish people came, that part was already but occupied by native people, even until Patagonia, very much in the south. And when the Spanish kingdom came, they didn't go so far. They went a little bit in the south, but the southern part of the country was really wild, and it was still under the control of native people that they lived there. So let's say once the republic was established in around 1810, there was this sort of idea of putting together everyone in the same place. So there were a lot of incentives also to give lands and for people, Western people to say, go and live in this part of Patagonia, and there is nothing but you can own, thousands of acres of territory, So that started, creating new cities. And if you go to the south of Chile, for example, just this is a very notorious example. You can find that there are places, for example, that they were occupied by German people coming to South America, that they were given, a lot of benefits and sometimes, free land in the south of Chile. So if you go to the south of Chile, there are cities that they look like Munich, or they look like towns, in the south of Germany. So it's very much like that in terms of how houses are built, the culture they have, and everything. So it's fascinating how that happened. Yeah.
I have actually prepared one story related to taxation and Chile.
Okay.
And then
Go ahead.
and then maybe, as our podcast is called Tax Stories, maybe you will have some tax related story as well. But here it goes. Uh, uh, there was this 10 cents war in Chile in 1879 to 84 against Bolivia and Peru. Bolivia had access to the Pacific Ocean, but as many Chilean companies were working there, Bolivia agreed with Chile not to increase exporting taxes on extracting materials, mainly nitrates and copper from that region. But in 1879, Bolivia breached the agreement and introduced 10 cents tax on the exports. So as a result, the war started and Bolivia lost the territory and thus the access to the ocean. This, I understand, still carries on some diplomatic tensions even today. And Peru, as an ally of Bolivia, lost some territory too. Is that close to the truth?
That's very much the truth. You make me you make me touch upon about very sensitive issues. I was talking about the South, which is a little bit not so not so politically
So
sensitive,
it's
but
still
that's,
painful topic, yeah?
I would say yes. Even though I've been, as I told you, many years abroad, and I'm not living in Chile for some time, more than a decade. It is a topic because if you think about it, is first of all is a war that lasted many years, and created, I would say, permanent diplomatic conflict. You don't see them much today, right? Because um, all Peru, Bolivia, Chile, they are still now democratic, countries, and there is no much of this tension. But you know that it exists, right? So you go to some part of Bolivia, and they will still say that Chile stole, the
Mm.
accession, to the Pacific Ocean, and yeah, it was a painful war, very bloody war as well. Uh, the Pacific War, it was, if I don't mistaken, it was a couple hundred years, that there was this conflict. So
Mm.
you are very accurate
Mm.
describing what happened. Yeah.
And now, do you have any story in your mind
Any story related? Tax
to
story.
tax?
Very.
I don't know, from movies or from books. If somebody would mention that, is there some story?
Related to Chile, you mean?
From not necessarily. I mean, to taxation in general.
To taxation in general. Mm, Not really on the top of my head. Huh? Not on the top of my head.
We
You got me here.
no worries. We actually chatted with Rita de la Feria that she has this nice hashtag on Twitter that there is always a tax angle. So we are mentioning some movies where there are tax issues coming up.
Yes,
So this
I see.
sometimes
I
is
see it.
is
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I see it all the time. We are very good friends with Rita, and sometimes she also send me those screenshots where where you find this tax angle in movies and some else. But to be honest, I don't have one on the top of my head right now. Yeah.
no worries. Is that actually true that I think I saw somewhere that you have been a student of Rita de la Feria?
No, that's not true. It would have been a privilege.
Mm.
We with Rita we met as colleagues. Probably the first time was in one of the meetings of the European Association of Tax Law Professors. When
Mm.
I would say when I was still not even officially a member of the association, and then we met in several tax conferences around Europe, and we became closer. But then we actually became friends during the time I was in Leeds, and that was great because sometimes you work with great colleagues, but it's fantastic when you can also become friends, and we have shared many times, and now in a few weeks. In a month, we have a trip also together with other colleagues at Leeds to China. So we are going together
Mm.
as part of a delegation of the University of Leeds. So it will be a very tough week of work, but also very fun because we are going with this group of friends, and Rita is a very good
Mm.
friend as well.
Indeed, she's great, and give my regards to her when you see her. Um,
Absolutely.
so I can imagine you were a boy playing football in the backyard of suburbs of Santiago. How did you meet taxation and met so much that you decided to study it?
That's a very fun question. Yes, I was very much that type of boy. I was very much into football. At some point, I have to say,
Really?
even I thought I could play football professionally, and I
So I was
tried.
not far from truth.
You were not too far from true. Actually, this is a really funny story because when I was in the last year of high school, um, I was playing for my school, and we participated in a tournament. And in this tournament, there were a lot of people scouting new players, and I was called to train and to see whether I could join a team. So I was very young, maybe 17, and I didn't tell anyone in my family. So I just went there
Mm.
one day. It was 8 a.m. So it was very far. So I have to walk up very early, and I arrived, to this place with all these kids that they are fighting, to have a future, in football. So and then suddenly this kid myself, arrived just to see whether how fun was there, to play football. And I remember one of the things that happened was that I was changing, and I left my shoes there on the bench, and then I went to put some stuff, in the locker, and I came back and my shoes were not there anymore. So, and
Okay.
then and then that was a very clear message, that they didn't want me there. So, so
Okay. And this changed your career.
that changed my career. I realized I'm not sure whether I'm still at that level of competition. So, but I enjoyed that experience. And what happened is that I went to the university. I studied law um, in Chile, and actually was in the last year of law school that I had a professor that he invited me to be a teaching assistant in tax law, and
Mm.
and that happened before because we used to study 1 year tax law. So in the first semester of tax law, actually, I have to say, it was really disappointing because I really liked the subject, but my final mark was not very good. And then in the second semester, it was the opposite. I didn't dedicate much time, but in the end, I got a very good mark. And then this professor invited me to be a teaching assistant, and I felt very honored, and I felt that this was great. And then that was combined with the fact that I was looking to start working, and another professor of the area, he was a partner in a big four in PwC,
Mm.
PricewaterhouseCoopers at that time. And one day we met in a wedding, and he asked me, what are you going to do now? And I said, I'm looking for a job. And he said, why don't you come and we have an interview next week? And then I started working there, and then all the rest, just just came
The
very
rest is
naturally.
history. Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Uh, so is football still your hobby, or you have switched to another one?
Well, with the years, I have to say I switch more towards tennis and other sports like even squash and badminton.
Mm.
But every time I can play football, I do it. The only problem with playing football is that you need a team, and you need at least 10 people,
Yeah.
and that's always complicated with the years. When you are at the uni, or when you are younger, you always have friends around, and it's not difficult to organize that.
Mm.
So
Mm.
last time I played football was here in Leeds, in a game we play, professors against students, and I realized how difficult it was after almost 10 years without playing.
So
Yeah.
that's great. I uh, I was wondering what generally inspires you in life. Any books or authors you can mention?
Well, there are some books that they have play, I could say, a major role in my life. So uh, one of them is, I don't know how familiar you are with Latin American literature, but it's from Gabriel Garcia Marquez, "100 Years of Solitude." Is a book
Yeah, it's
that
very
changed.
popular.
Yeah, it changed completely uh, the way of seeing literature as well, because this idea of navigating through an imaginary town with this sort of very magical things happening, and describe at such level of detail as he does. Um, it was great. I discovered Garcia Marquez when I was very young. I was probably 13 or 14 years old. So every time I take one of those books I read back then and I read them again, I always discover something new. Happens as well with, for example, with Borges. Borges is another author, an Argentinian author that I like very much. And
Mm.
a few months ago, I read again the Aleph, um, and when I read it the first time, or twice before, I was maybe 16 and 20 years old, and now I read it again, and it was a complete different interpretation of the book, because it shows you, it's these sort of books that they are written to remain, in time, and to always give you a lesson.
Mm. Mm.
So yeah, that's what I could mention. That the moment that so those are two books that they really make a difference in my life. Yeah.
But they Marcus made a difference by uh, how did they influence your life? So
They
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 changed.
They change in the way that, to be honest, they develop or they help me to develop creativity much more. I was captivated by the way in which, for example, Garcia Marquez was capable to describe in such a level of detail things that he only had in his mind, and that showed me, that it doesn't matter what you write. It could be a book like he wrote. It could be a small blog, an op-ed. It can be a technical book, but you should never forget, that when you are writing, you are trying to communicate, and that's the essence to be a good writer. We all can write about, for example, tax topics. We all can have our opinion about technical issues, but the point is how we pose those arguments, and that helped me a lot to develop, let's say, my own style of writing. When I write academic papers, which is mostly what I write, at some point I would like to write something different, I have to say. I like to do it in a way that the reader as well can feel persuaded and can feel I understand 100% what you are trying to say, and it generates an emotion. It's not only about reading something; it's about what you feel when you read it internally. How you read this paper. Sometimes you are like, "This is brilliant! It's a great idea." How I didn't think about that. So that's the feeling I had reading, Garcia Marquez, and then Borges was something similar, in the sense that Borges perhaps was a little bit more complicated to understand in the beginning, because he uses also, I could say, a lot of psychology in the books. So when at an early age, it was difficult to get into all of that, but at the same time showed me that he was capable to analyze social things from a story that he created. And there is a lot of criticisms about the society. There is a lot of opinion and strong arguments about life in a very simple story. So I try to think about that every time I need to write something. Is make it simple, make it attractive, and make people entertained. That's also writing, even if you do it at a technical level.
That's so inspiring. I fully agree. I think this creativity can open so many eyes and doors that people also can look at taxation in that it's sometimes fascinating how to change this perception of boring topics into some even entertainment sometimes. So
Yeah.
For me it sounded, I haven't read Marcus, but sounded like Harry Potter of that time maybe. I don't know how much it's true, but
I have to say Garcia Marquez is way better, but
yeah. So
but yes,
it's
it's a
already
sort
on
of
my reading list. Yeah.
that sounds very good. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Um, So let's move to some taxation. You tried private practice a couple of times, but always returned to academia. Why?
Uh, why? Because I think that I was very early stage of my career. I was looking for my place, and when I tried private practice first, I sort of felt that something was missing. And this has to be also because of the way businesses are done, right? So everything is for yesterday or the day before yesterday. So there is no much time for analysis. There's no much time to think. There's no much time to even challenge anything. So I felt that most of my work as a tax advisor, as a lawyer, was very limited to give a quick answer to a very particular problem. And most of the time, I had plenty of questions. Why this is like that? Why we have a system like that? Why Brazil, things are this way? Why there are no transfer pricing rules like in other place? Why we don't have? So so all of these things, they came to my mind, but I realized I have no time to really think about this, or nobody actually cares. So that side was really empty all the time. So I realized I need to find a way to get that part that was missing. Then when I tried again in other countries, I realized that the problem was not the place, but was rather the practice in itself. I mean, practice is fascinating. I always tell my students, go to practice, because you will see how businesses are really done. But what happened to me is that very quickly I got bored, right? Because I had this lack of stimulation that I needed, in terms of sitting down, thinking maybe all what I'm putting into practice now makes no sense and needs to change. And I wanted to be in those decisions, to be honest. I wanted to be in those very macro decisions, about the systems that governs, countries themselves. So I tried to find my way, and ultimately that came, from redirecting my whole career. When I moved to Europe to pursue a PhD, I had in mind that was my ultimate goal. This is the way I'm going to achieve this. So the PhD became, a sort of just a medium to get into that, to get into policy work, to get into, legislative discussions, with governments, which is what I do most of the time when I'm not seated here at the office, writing a paper.
Right, I hear what you're saying, but and I like sometimes actually quite. I blog almost every day, and I research. I enjoy this research process. But how do you feel about the? I lack this. I would lack this practical approach that I if I'm just researching, I don't see maybe what's happening in the practice. Do you see what's happening in the practice?
Well, I could say I'm not as far as it sounds, because even when let's say when I quit being a practitioner 100% of the time, which was the time I was living in Brazil, and I moved to Europe, I kept practicing. I kept some things, particularly because the work of a lawyer, even if you're a tax lawyer, of a corporate lawyer, is very much attached, to your relationship with clients. So what happened is that when I said I quit, I leave, I had clients, in Colombia, in Miami, that they said, "Can you keep doing this for us? And we will pay you, what we were paying to this office. We want you to do it." And back then, I had a student loan to pay, and I thought, yeah, let's do it. I mean, it was the right decision, because for me, for example, the inspiration of the book, the second edition of Double Non-Taxation and the Use of Hybrid Entities, the inspiration for that first edition came from my own practice, where I had to do a lot of structures, using check the box in the US, and being concerned about CFC rules and other things. And after I've seen all of that in practice, of course, it was easier to think about those issues. You are right. We tend to draw a sort of a world black and white. So on one side you have practitioners, on the other side you have academics, but nothing is really black and white. I mean, if I wouldn't have still that contact that I have sometimes, with practice, and I do it, and with consultancy work, or if I couldn't have, that contact with policy work, of course, I would be very much detached from also the reality of things, right? We used to have I still is a common phrase in Chile that says it's a different thing when you have the guitar in your hands. So you need to know how to. So I can say I can play the guitar, right? But it's a very different thing when you are in front of the audience and you need to play the guitar. So I'm absolutely with you. Practice is fundamental to keep connection, even that connection with practitioners, with policymakers, is fundamental because they are the whole day playing the guitar. I'm just theorizing about how to play guitar should be.
Let's talk a bit about your book once you started. So, hybrid entities. I faced them in practice just once, quite some time ago. Do you think it's still a common practice after BEPS? And if yes, what would be the most typical situations?
Absolutely, is still, and it will be, because I could say the main generator of hybrids is the fact that countries, they don't agree, they don't coordinate how to treat foreign entities for tax purposes. And on the top of that, you have a country like the US that basically tells taxpayers, listen, you decide how you are going to treat these entities abroad to the extent that they are eligible entities. This is the common check the box, right? So you file a form, it calls check the box because honestly, when you see the form, it says, how do you want to treat your entity? A, corporation, B, partnership, and you check that particular box. And if you think about it, the fact that the US has not changed anything after BEPS, I don't see how the likelihood of still having hybrids or hybrid entity structures will necessarily change. The thing that will change, and the thing that has changed, and I give that to the OECD, is that you make those structures more costly. So now it's more difficult to engage into hybrid mismatch arrangements using hybrid entities. But let's be honest, the OECD didn't end up with the generation of hybrids for very simple reasons. They didn't target the problem. They target just the sickness, which was the outcome coming from the use of these vehicles.
You mentioned US system has not changed too much after BEPS. How do you see, actually, it's very interesting topic, the US taxation, that I think it was for a while the one of the major hosts of offshore companies. So do you see it will change somehow post BEPS, post Pillar 2 and post BEPS?
No, and I will tell you why. Because the United States is the best demonstration that countries they pursue and they follow their own policy interest, and you can decide to which extent you give up part of that and you promote cooperation, but to the extent that is beneficial for you. And when you have the power for that, the economic power for that, you can do that and nobody can contradict you. This is how it works. A different thing is that you go with a different speech, to the OECD, and you say that countries now they need to do this or that. But from a perspective of a powerful developed country, the story will always be the same, because you can end cooperation entirely, and this of course will have a cost, but if that cost is not so high, it doesn't really matter. So I would like to be more positive and say, yes, BEPS created a fundamental change, and now we will see more and more how countries like the United States will move towards, domestic changes, to accommodate the legislation to the so-called international standards, but that won't happen. They create the international standards because actually those are very beneficial for them as well, right? And think about what is happening now with Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. I will put both together. Who was the main promoter at some point when this project was going nowhere? So besides, France and Germany, the United States said, countries, they have to do that. So we need a floor for tax competition, talking about Pillar 2. A lot of travels around the world convincing the ministers of finance of different countries to endorse the project when let's say a big part of the world was getting convinced about this. What did the US or the US Congress said? This is not going to happen here. And it's not going to happen. And it's not going to happen. We need to be very, very realistic on this. The US won't implement Pillar 2 and it won't implement Pillar 1. So at the end, what we have, a rest of the world that accommodated to the interests of who knows who is ultimately, behind this. And then a country like the US that can be a promoter, but can at the same time, stay one step aside and say, you guys, deal with your things, I'm gonna still consider my own interest. That's why most of my work now has been dedicated as well to see the impact of these measures in developing countries, because it's very easy to create these narratives of very altruistic narrative. We want the benefit for all countries, you and you and you, and also for us. And then at the end of the day, it's not true. The United States and all the countries around the world, they want, their own interest safe first, right? And that's how the economic reality is.
Speaking of Pillar 1, I saw that you're quite deep into digitalization, taxation issues, and I remember from the previous Tax Stories interview with Pascal Seneman, he said that until December, the US might decide or not about going forward with Pillar 1. Do you know what is the status now? And is this going to if there is no positive decision on the US side, is this going to trigger digital sales taxes in Europe?
Well, that's an excellent question. Let me answer the first part. What's going to happen in the US? Nothing, because they don't have the quorum to approve this, and that's. I think that Pascal knows that, and everybody knows that, and there is no let's see here. It's not going to happen, and we need to get convinced about that. The US is not going to approve that because there is no quorum to do that, and that's how the rules of democracy work. Even if Biden administration once did super hard, they don't have the quorum, so it's not going to happen. So what is the result of that? I could say it's unavoidable that we will start seeing more digital services taxes. Europe started already with the trend after the failure of the directive in 2018. More and more countries have been endorsing, a digital services tax. The UK has a digital services tax as well. It's an easy way to address this issue, but you also need to pay attention to what other countries will do. I think European countries can go in the trend of digital services taxes, but pay attention to what Latin American countries are doing at the moment, what other countries in Asia may start doing, because a digital services tax is not the holy grail, right? And Latin American countries have shown, for example, that you can modify your VAT system, include online service, onto that, charge, VAT and these sort of services, and then you will be ensuring, those revenues. without the need of creating this sort of hybrid tax as a digital service tax, which is a tax that you can call whatever you want, indirect, a super indirect tax, but in the end of the day, it's a tax, on revenues, and that's a tax on income. So, solutions like that can start, coming up. I wouldn't be surprised that the whole debate about Article 12 of the UN model now revive again, perhaps with a modified Article 12b as an alternative, especially when it comes, to treaties among developing countries where they use the UN model, and we start seeing that implemented, through the double tax conventions. So that's how the world will be ruled. But you are right in your intuition that perhaps what we will see mostly around will be digital services taxes, and they come, of course, with their own problems, discrimination, and many other issues that I have also addressed, in papers. That they make them perhaps, the not the best solution.
And now the U.S. companies will have to deal with so many digital services taxes in different countries. So probably not the best situation they want to be in. But the politics probably also kick in this issue, because if everybody understands going against U.S. companies and then politically, especially now in Eastern Europe, when we have war next doors, then basically, not so sure if politicians will want to do anything against US and NATO in that sense. But what do you think? I actually suggested, and it got enough votes to bring it to the parliament that now Latvia has to, as Russia is in the blacklist of EU offshore jurisdictions, then Latvia should have prohibitive 90% withholding tax on any payments to Russia, direct or indirect. So do you think that is a good approach to limit any trade with Russia right now?
Well, that's a difficult question, because I mean the tax system will play only one part of the role, depending on what you want to achieve. You want to end up any sort of or to make trading costly. Taxation can play a role, but if you really want to close completely the any sort of trade with Russia, that won't be enough, unless you say there will be 100% taxation, on any payments going there. So what's the problem with that? I mean, it happens in other areas as well, that sometimes politicians, they tend to see taxation as the only way to ensure certain interest, right? And it happens in other areas as well. When you think about, we need to protect the environment, so less tax. We need to ensure, that X or Y, achieve. We need a tax, and that's problematic. That's the essence of constructing, a policy where taxation seems to be as the holy grail that will solve everything. It is not like that, and it's something I tend also to repeat sometimes. When I have conversations with governments as well, don't forget, the taxes, they play just a small part, in the whole the whole package, you know. So whether this is the right or the wrong approach, I think it could be very overly simplistic to say that right now with not many other stuff on the table. But I would say it's never good just to look at the tax system, you know, when you want to solve a problem.
But what to do then about this? Because I think during the war, it's not right to send any money to Russia where it goes to the Russian state budget and funds the missiles going to on Ukrainian heads. So the trade is still going on in Europe with Russia. How to make people think?
Well, I could say, James, perhaps, you know, a way better way and would have a very similar effect would be just to create, you know, a direct ban, you know, a prohibition of trade. Any sort of trade is prohibited, right? So this approach, you know, of saying I'm gonna make the trade more costly, so I'm gonna tax you more, it's a little bit I don't know how to say. It's not very honest, to put it in such a way.
If it's
Right?
20%, then I agree with you. But 90% or 100, it's prohibitive. Basically, it's should
It's,
have the same effect.
it's true and it's not true at the same time, because it really depends of the cost of benefit that are, you know, upon the let's say the company that is trading, you know, with the partner in Russia, you know. So if you say today, let's say I'm trading and it costs me £100, you know, to move these to Russia, now will cost me 190, but the Russian government offers me a grant of 90, it will cost me 100 anyway. So the game that you can play in this way is it's very easy. So I would say a more effective way again wouldn't be to look at whether we put a 200%, you know, tax rate on money going to Russia. Would be simply, you know, banning completely, you know, the trade, if that is ultimately what wants to be achieved, you know. So what I mean is that there are ways to achieve particular policies that they don't need necessarily to involve any sort of taxation. Taxation can play a role, but in this particular case, I could say it play a role that I don't know how effective will be to persuade those that they're involved in trading, and that they can compensate more taxation with perhaps, you know, grants or the benefits, you know, that they offer, and at the end of the day, the costs are not really increasing.
The only problem is that the ban should be at European level, not in the national level. So it's something we can do nationally. But let's switch the topic to tax reforms you have helped to implement. I saw Indonesia, Curacao. Are those the most important jobs for tax reforms, and what they were about?
Yeah, at the moment, I could say yes. In the case of Indonesia, that was particularly the introduction of interest limitation rules in the country. So they used to have a system of thin cap rules. So with a higher ratio, I think it was 5:1, and they wanted to introduce the rules of earnings stripping. You know, 30% of EBITDA. So most of my work was a very technical work to, first of all, to see the viability of the implementation of these rules in the country, and particularly how they could be adapted to the reality that they wanted still the thin cap rule to exist in parallel to their stripping rules, which, by the way, was super interesting, because it was one of the first time that I saw myself that one thing is what you can have in mind in theory about implementation of tax rules and tax policy, but another thing is what politics they have to say about it. And I hope I'm not breaking any any rule here, disclosing this, but at some point, when they were in the middle of the discussion, there was this intention, we really need, both. We need thin cap and we need earnings-driven rules. And my question was always, why? How inefficient is that? I mean, why to make your whole tax system so complex? And someone told me, well, the boss wants that. The boss wants that, and we need to find a way to do it. So in the end of the day, I thought, okay, if the boss wants that, so let's do it this way. Those years that we have a negative EBITDA, we can apply thin cap, and that would be a way to maintain this alive for a purpose other than just being, there. But it helped me a lot to also figure out, that even though, the most efficient way would have been to repeal completely thin cap and implement earnings stripping rules, that was not possible from a political perspective. And the other case of Curacao is still going on. It's actually, I'm part of a committee of experts that they come from different areas of expertise, practice, academia, policymaking. So it's a group that is directly advising the Ministry of Finance of Curacao on, let's say, the implementation of several international tax standards, including, particularly at the moment, Pillar 2 and exchange of information agreement, and try to, in the long term, the whole idea is to make the country, appear compliant worldwide, and perhaps, to avoid these very unfair classifications of grey list, black list, sometimes, countries like Curacao and other Caribbean countries are threatened, constantly if they don't if they don't adhere to a specific standard. So my job there is very interesting because it's very contingent, and at the moment is dealing with all these issues proposed by the OECD, and we are trying to find the best way that works for the country from an investment perspective, but also with this image that is very relevant in many developing countries.
I even had to look up where Curacao is. Sorry about that. But did you see anything interesting about their tax system, or you're just were focused on their Pillar 2?
No, they have many interesting things in the corporate income tax system, starting with this optional territorial system. And you can opt, and there are some requirements. You can opt for certain periods, and then be subject, to territorial taxation with a rate of 22%. The other thing I realize is how high the nominal rates of corporate income tax are in Curacao. They amount to, they have this rate of 22%, which is very elevated, and that of course shows a lot of the hypocrisy, worldwide, because I live in a country like the UK that until a few months ago, the corporate income tax rate was 19% nominal. I don't see the UK listed in any sort of list in Europe, but we have, a small Caribbean country, with a nominal tax rate of 20%, which is there is a lot to change in the international context of what we also consider, a tax haven, and perhaps this is a subject for a complete different podcast, but it shows a lot of how the dynamics of powers, are distributed worldwide. While I am now in a developed country, with a 19%, now recently increased to 25% nominal corporate income tax rate. Many developing countries that I have visited, they have way higher nominal corporate income tax rates. To which extent that is considered when those countries are very easily qualified as tax havens, I don't know, because it seems to be that those random qualifications, they just come, from an office in Brussels by some people that they just tend to have, a preconceived idea of what a tax haven, should be or should look like, right? So for that reason, I since the moment I was invited to participate, helping the government of Curacao, I wanted to do it. I decided to accept. One of the reasons was to show that there is a lot of misconception about many Caribbean countries, many small island countries in the Caribbean, and about their tax system as well. So we see a pond, we see a beach, we see a beautiful sea, and we tend to think, oh, that's a tax haven. Because we have been manipulated for many years. Those are tax haven, but you see a nice red bus going around a posh neighborhood in a city called London, and we don't call that a tax haven. So, so the difference is that the weather is so bad here that it will never be a tax haven.
So it's clear about double standards in UK and US comparing to the developing countries. But I saw actually that you were researching quite a lot about developing countries and in the context of Pillar 2 and in general. So what are your couple of main takeaways from these researches?
Well, I could say my main takeaway is that despite the fact that this project, the Pillar 2, has been presented to the public as a very altruistic project, that is going to benefit all countries, both developing countries, doesn't matter. I tend to be more skeptical about the impact that it will have on developing countries. So my main message is always like, let's be careful, because when we look at the project, the Pillar 2 is working upon many premises that they ultimately prove to be false. The first one, and I would say the main one, is this premise that all tax incentives, corporate income tax incentives, they are incapable to attract any sort of foreign direct investment to a developing country. And I would say that idea is because we have been, bombed by research and by politicians and by people, from certain organizations, telling us or telling developing countries, don't use your tax system to attract investments. That's not good for you. And I could give you many examples of countries that they have very important tax incentives, and they are indeed attracting foreign direct investment. There are some very good investment in Malaysia, in South Africa, that they work. So the premise that all tax incentives are not working is indeed false. Then there is a second premise, I would say, which is that we tend to presume that all developing countries, now that we put pressure on them, don't use your corporate income tax system to attract investment to compete, they're gonna switch to other forms of competition or to other forms of tax competition, perhaps personal income tax competition, very easily. And that will prove to be true only for a few of them. Right? Some of them that they have less competitive advantages, that they have a complete different reality in comparison to the neighbor countries that they are around them, they will struggle much more. Right? So this preconceived idea that, oh, okay, so who cares? Don't compete with your corporate income tax system, compete with something else. Yeah, what if I'm a country that have not much of that something else? Nobody thinks about that because these tend to be thought like all countries have similar competitive advantage. Then there is a third one, and this one I tend to repeat it very much around the world. the whole project of Pillar 2 is about a presumption of revenues. And this was perhaps a narrative created by the OECD when they needed this critical mass, right? So originally they started with this idea: you don't join the project, we punish you. How we punish you? Someone else will take the revenues for you, right? And this didn't work. So they changed that for this more altruistic narrative, saying, oh, wait a second. Now, if you have a domestic minimum tax that someone will consider qualified or not, then you have the priority to collect all these revenues that will be magically generated in your country. And developing countries have started buying that. And all developing countries, every single developing country I visit, they all ask me the same: how much revenues are we going to get? And my answer is always, I don't know. You need an impact assessment for that, right? Maybe you won't get any revenues for the very simple reason, that we need to consider factors like how elastic are your investors in the country? Are they going to stay or are they going to leave? What are the competitive advantages you have as a country? So if we compare country A with country B, both in a very nice climate, but country A has, great infrastructure, better political stability, and while country B implementing now this QDMTT, thinks I'm getting all the revenues without thinking, if my investors are very elastic, why they should stay in my country where my neighbor country is offering all the competitive advantages that I cannot offer. Isolating the tax system is always problematic, because when we analyze everything based on taxation, we forget about the rest. And the rest is extremely important when it comes to investment decisions, right? So that's what I don't like from the BEPS 2.0 or Pillar 2 and how it is presented to developing countries. I don't know how much beneficial it will be. At least some of them they will lose. Some of them nothing is going to happen, right? For some of them. They will switch into personal income tax competition. They will offer subsidies. I don't know why subsidies are better than a tax incentive, when in fact, I would tend to see a tax incentive as something more beneficial from the perspective of corruption. But anyway, it seems to be that this is the way. So there is this push in those countries to move towards this sort of benefit. And some of them will be capable to do it, but let's be honest, some others won't, and those will be the big losers in this sort of battle, right? And the point is that nobody cares. Nobody cares, because there is one clear winner, and those are developed countries. They won't lose anything. They are just simply transferring wealth, right? When they implement these rules and they say, well. They will be taxed somewhere with the QDMTT. That's a transfer of wealth, right? But when we have that, or we go into the reality of those developing countries, and then we have that between them, it can be really a move of investor from one country to the other. That will be a cost, and a high cost for them.
Mm. And because of that, do you see that there will be a general trend that UN will take over to be a fashion designer instead of OECD?
I think that you read what I posted today.
No, I didn't, but
okay. So I just posted my thoughts on that. There is, what happened with there is a very interesting thing about the UN taking a sort of a more visible role in taxation. And I would say this is not about simply swapping roles from OECD to the UN. So now the UN will do everything great in comparison to what the OECD did. No, that won't happen. and we need to be realistic about that. But there is something very important on the fact that the whole movement of the UN being more aggressively participating in the international tax debate is, and this is precisely because of the message. The message today is the OECD for many years had the complete monopoly of the narrative of what international tax law should be, what countries should do. And if you think about it, in the very beginning, everything was about the standards. These are the general standards. These are the guidelines. This is what countries can or cannot do. These are, general recommendations for countries, to do, until we arrived to BEPS. And BEPS was a very good laboratory to test how much you can push countries to endorse these so-called international standards. Why do I say this? Because at that very moment, when BEPS came with the 15 actions, they were these so-called minimum standards. So a little part of that project was not voluntary, it was mandatory. If you implement BEPS, or if you want to implement BEPS, this is mandatory. And then came the other side, which was the multilateral instrument, right? So that was the perfect laboratory to test how much I can really bring countries, towards cooperation. So when Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 came, the narrative was not about recommendations for countries. The narrative was, this is the policy that you need to implement. So what are we going to do is, like myself with my team in Paris, drafting these rules. We are going to put all the countries together, to listen. You guys now understand how this work, go and implement it. Convince your own governments to implement this rule. This is how Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 is working. Pillar 2 mostly because Pillar 1, nobody was really giving attention to that. But Pillar 2 works that way. Right? The inclusive framework was never, the organism to debate about things. It was a place to inform countries how this has to be implemented. So changing that is important, because the fact that the OECD monopolized the narrative for decades about what should or should not be done in the international tax arena created, what we have today, which is a new rule maker. The OECD is a rule maker of international tax law, self-attributed rule maker. So how we end up that? We need a counterbalance. We need the UN. If it's not the UN, we need something else. So the fact that the UN is reacting in this way is very important for that message. Now, what we should expect from the future, not to make the same mistake. So first of all this is a momentum, and we need to take it, and it's good that countries are endorsing this. But second is, don't make the same mistakes that they were done in the past. So flexibility is a very important part of what this new role in international tax law the UN want to play, right? Flexibility means you need to recognize that countries, they have their own interests, and they need to accommodate any sort of international standard to those interests. We cannot impose countries, ideas as if we were living in a single block, centralized tax administration around the world that doesn't exist. The reality of countries is completely different. Even among developing countries is completely different. So if we want this to succeed, it's important to have in mind those two things. First of all, yes, this is necessary. It was a reaction, and we need to take the momentum. But secondly, if we want to build up something useful for the future, the UN shouldn't repeat what the OECD is doing, right? The UN is not the new rule maker in international tax law. It should be something entirely different. It should be a place where countries, feel comfortable to disagree, They feel comfortable to express as well the deviations from the perspective of what seems to be an international standard, and that will make, in my view, international cooperation more fruitful, much more than what existed, with the self-attributed role created by the OECD.
Right. We have criticized a lot many people and countries and governments, but if you put your Garcia Marquez hat on and imagine a nice, great tax environment, how would it look like?
That's a very good question. You're right. Sometimes, when we get into this topic, I tend to be very critical. But on the other hand, I have to say, I also recognize that not everything what has been done is bad. So one thing that I very much like from the role of the OECD, and put it in the context, of what could be, this Garcia Marquez, is that we talk about taxation every single day in every single context. I have been with friends, that they are not tax people, and they know about taxes, and they know about what is happening, and they are curious about this minimum tax, and they're curious about digital services tax. So taxes is everywhere. And that was the result of the ambition of the OECD. So the OECD, starting with the BEPS project, and later on with the two pillars, made international tax law fashionable. Somewhere I heard Pascal saying, made it sexy. It's true. Mm. It's cool. It's cool to talk about international tax law now, and that's something positive. It's positive because even politicians get interested into these matters. Now, how this could look like? Well, one of the characteristics of Garcia Marquez is that all these roles, sometimes you're always discovering something new in these roles, right? Or you discover a new character that appears suddenly in a hidden town. This is a little bit how I expect the years to come. I don't think that the appearance of the UN into the scene is the end of the story. I think that something different might come because countries, they learn, or they are in the process of learning how to cooperate without renouncing entirely to their own sovereign interests. And I wouldn't be surprised that in the future we are talking about an ad hoc or any sort of committee where perhaps rules are made real rules. International tax law, real international tax law is being created to the extent, again, that we learn that countries primarily are driven by their own interests. If we know that, if we recognize that, if we respect that, I think that the future of international tax law can become something quite nice and quite beautiful, in the sense that we can all live together in harmony, right? But doing things through imposition, even though if this is an implicit imposition, it will always bring us to chaos. Why? For a very simple reason. Why we are the two of us talking now about Pillar 1, Pillar 2, this happening, and in 5 more years we will be talking why this actually failed. Why country A, B, or C decided to drop the rules of minimum taxation, and this is precisely what we need to avoid. If we want a real cooperation that lasts through years, it is important that recognition is made. The recognition that countries' sovereign interest is the primary purpose by which they are driven.
Great. Leopoldo, I still have many questions, but our time is limited. I wouldn't dare to abuse your kind uh, time for dedicated for this podcast. But I always end up the podcast with the last same question to everybody, to every guest. What would be your version of meaning of life? So, on a general philosophical note.
Well, something that I apply, I have to say, daily. Take it easy. Don't get so convinced about yourself. We are just try to take life, in an easy way and enjoy simple things. This is what I always try to do, and don't take yourself so serious. That's perhaps my main message. Uh,
Brilliant.
laugh a lot.
Absolutely brilliant. So thank you very much. I really enjoyed this ride with you, and I hope to meet you in person finally somewhere at IFA Congress or somewhere else.
It would be my pleasure, Janice, and thanks so much for the invite. I had a really great time, and let's see when we will meet next.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate.